What up, party people? What up, YouTube? This is Chef, New Zealand Murder History Podcast. Welcome to the show. So check this out. First off, this episode of New Zealand Murder History Podcast isn't suitable for children. Anyone suffering from mental health problems, perhaps give this one a miss. If you are in need of support, contact your GP or call one of the many 0800 numbers available. We'll be discussing mistreatment of mentally ill people. We're going to be discussing female genital mutilation, unfortunately. And we're going to be discussing a massive fire that took place at Cliffs Lunatic Asylum in the 40s. So it's a pretty heavy show. My show is just for educational purposes, of course, and not to cause offence to any of these women who died in the fire on the 8th of December 1942. Yeah, kids, click off. You don't want to watch this. This is a really, really bad part of New Zealand history here. Check this out. I just want to show you guys some of these photos before the light fades. So first of all, this is the place I'm talking about. That's Cliffs. Okay, now Cliffs Lunatic Asylum. Yeah. It was horrific. There's been other horrific ones in New Zealand. Apparently Lake Alice had a lot of sex assaults, patient-on-patient sex assaults. I'm not saying that it's a competition or any of them has to be worse than other ones, but this place apparently, Cliffs, is pretty bad. So this here is the Cliff Asylum kitchen block. So Lunatic Asylum kitchen block where they cook for the mentally ill people, and also the tuberculosis ward, TB ward. So that's what that building was. See, a couple of the buildings are still up there, but the main buildings have been demolished. Yeah, North Otago, Cliffs, a small town of, apparently it's less than 100 people who live there. And that's where this monstrous place actually was. So, yeah, now let's talk about Janet Frame for a moment. I'm just going to show you who I'm talking about here. She was a patient at Cliffs. Only she won a literary prize, which actually stopped her getting a lobotomy. So, I mean, that's pretty horrific. Imagine that if she was like a literary... I'm not saying they should give a lobotomy to anybody, but I mean, she's literally a prize-winning author, and they wanted to give her a lobotomy. So that just shows that they don't know what they're doing. Yeah. Sort of lost for words on this one, really, because it's pretty messed up. But anyway, let's reference this article here I'm about to read you. So first of all, we've got the story of Cliffs. Actually, I better show you the last photos I was going to show you where we've still got light. So that's Frame a long time ago, when she's a bit younger than the first photo I showed you. Where's the one I was going to show you? Hang on, I got a good one here. Okay. In my last podcast on this bloke, Lionel Terry. So this is a self-portrait that Lionel Terry did in Cliffs. And I got to say, it's actually pretty good. I mean, it's pretty indulgent. It's sort of got him all like a holy man or something almost with the way the light's falling on him. But, it's not a bad painting. I mean, you couldn't say it was terrible. Anyway, that was the bloke who shot... it's gotten written it here. What's his name? Joe Kum Yung was his name. He shot the old Chinaman. He was a patient at Cliffs. So, I mean, they had some pretty messed up patients, but the way they dealt with that, well, it wasn't good. I mean, it was all bad, rather. All right. Now let's start this off. So this article I'm reading to you now is the story of Cliff, the most haunted place in New Zealand, and that's written on the 13th of February 2021, and that's available on www the spinoff.co.nz. So let's have a read of this article. A short history of the it's by Louise Fisher. By Louise Fisher. A short history of the Otago Hospital that was initially known for its enlightened attitudes towards mental health and later became notorious for mistreatment and abuse. Content warning contains historical ableist language and description of inhumane medical treatment. Around 30 kilometres north of Dunedin lie the remains of a once thriving psychiatric hospital. This is Seacliff. And for many, it's a nightmare-inducing place that is haunted by the spirits of patients past. The story of Seacliff begins in the mid-1800s, an era where Otago's population soared as people flocked to the area in the hope of striking it rich in the goldfields. As the gold deposits started to dry up, workers and their families moved to Dunedin, putting strain on the city's minimal infrastructure, including its medical facilities. In 1874, architect Robert Lawson began work on Cliffs Lunatic Asylum, which was officially opened 10 years later. The main building was still being constructed. Okay, so it's opened in 1884, that means. And it went until 1952. So it was open for quite a while, this institution. Being constructed largely by unskilled patients already living at Seacliff. At the time, the asylum was the largest building in New Zealand, with housing for 500 patients and staff. The grand and beautiful buildings and surrounding land were unique in New Zealand and included orchards, gardens, glass houses, all contributing to a more rehabilitative model of mental health treatment that had previously been the norm. Only a few years into operation, Seacliff's buildings started to experience structural issues, rumoured to be caused by the lack of professional builders involved in the construction. In 1887, a landslip on the site caused serious damage. An inquiry found Lawson at fault for the faulty design and build, and he was ordered to upgrade and fix the buildings at risk. The controversy ruined Lawson's career. He went from one of New Zealand's most successful architects to all but unemployable. In 1889, Frederick Truby King was appointed superintendent at Seacliff. King, who would go on to found the Plunkett Society, was instrumental in pioneering new forms of treatment at Seacliff, influencing the way mental health was treated in New Zealand. So this particular part of this article, anyway, is talking Truby King up. But I just want to show you guys this guy, because he actually wasn't that great. He was a deviant. And if he tried to get some more nutritional food for his patients, well, okay, he might have done one thing right. Even a broken clock's right twice a day. But this guy, he was a deviant. He wasn't good, eh? That's what Truby King Park in Wellington's named after, this fella. So, freaky old doctor dude. It wasn't good. Influencing the way mental health was treated in New Zealand, patients were given nutritious diets, encouraged to get fresh air and exercise, and were assigned jobs such as gardening. Rather than being locked in cells, they lived in villa-style houses. Staff were given professional training and clear outlines for discipline. While these initiatives suggest a relatively enlightened approach to mental health, King's legacy remains controversial and complex. He was an enthusiastic proponent of eugenics and the racial superiority of white Europeans, and participated in dangerous and inhumane experiments on patients. Yeah, so it does tell you through the rest of the article that he's in fact not always regarded as a good bloke. Yeah, anyway, the most notorious dangerous Seacliff resident was murderer and white supremacist Lionel Terry, who shot and killed Chinese immigrant Joe Kum Yung in Wellington in 1905. Terry was initially sentenced to death, but his sentence was reduced on appeal to life in a psychiatric institution. He spent the first part of his sentence in Christchurch Sunnyside Asylum, from which he escaped twice. After being caught the second time in early 1914, Terry was transferred to Seacliff, housed in solitary confinement and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Under King's care, Terry seemed to improve and was later allowed more freedoms, such as painting and gardening. However, his mental state began to again deteriorate, and he was returned to solitary confinement after assaulting a doctor who attempted to vaccinate him. It's believed he was still in solitary confinement when he died of a stroke in 1952. During the early 1900s, rumors of patient mistreatment began to circulate. There were claims that patients were beaten, given lobotomies, and received electroconvulsive therapy. One of the most shocking stories was that of Anne Marie Annon, who arrived at Seacliff in 1890 and was subjected to a barbaric, unsexing treatment, which involved removing her fallopian tubes, ovaries, and clitoris in 1921. Oh, no, sorry, that's the end of the sentence. And then it's going to start. Anyway, it's unknown if there are more victims of this particular, it's FGM, isn't it? But yeah, Truby King and other doctors were involved in that, so bloke's not great. Yeah. I personally find that extremely disturbing. But anyway, let's carry on with the rest of this article, because it can't get any worse than that. Alright, now, Colonel MacDonald, executive of the Dunedin Returned Soldiers Association, said that soldiers who had recently served in the Great War were being held against their will, stripped of their rights, and abused. MacDonald told an inquiry that the situation at Seacliff was the most unpleasant thing he'd ever had to tackle in over 25 years of military service. MacDonald also believed that soldiers at Seacliff, so ex-soldiers, ex-NZDF, at Seacliff, were being denied their benefits and pensions. It appears that Seacliff administrators did all they could to hide the evidence of their abuse of soldiers, and no further action was taken over the matter. On the evening of the 8th of December 1942, a fire broke out in Ward 5, a two-story wooden structure that housed 39 female patients in single rooms and a 20-bed dormitory. So there's a 20-bed dormitory and 19 women in single rooms. I'm guessing the ones in single rooms needed more care, or they needed to be on their own for whatever reason. Anyway, this was so this is Ward 5, two-story wooden structure. Yeah. All of the building's windows and doors were locked and could not be opened from the inside. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the building in a matter of minutes. No one was on duty that night, but a member of staff checked on the patients every hour. The alarm was raised and an attempt made to put out the fire with hoses from a small on-site fire station prior to the firefighters' arrival. However, it was too late. It was too little too late. 37 of the 39 patients died in the fire. That's really bad odds. Only 2 of them made it out. Of those 2 who were saved, one was rescued by the staff member who first noticed the fire. The grating was pulled off her window and she was dragged out. The other patient was rescued by being pulled out of the first floor. While the firefighters were unable to stop the fire destroying Ward 5, they did manage to stop the fire spreading to other buildings at Seacliff. So I'm not certain if Ward 5 was a standalone building or if it was attached to another building, but they managed to stop it spreading. At the time, the Seacliff fire was New Zealand's worst loss of life in a single event. So, there was actually a fire worse from this 5 years later. It's a Ballentynes factory in Christchurch, but that's another podcast. In January of 1943, an inquiry into the fire began. Coroner David Gray was unable to find the cause of the fire, but recommended many changes to Seacliff to stop it happening again. Moving forward, patients were to be supervised at all times, and automatic fire alarms and sprinklers were to be installed. Gray concluded that the fault was in the hospital's bad design and that it should have been shut down years ago. Building Inspector Sidney Kershaw came forward to state that he had warned Seacliff of its inadequate fire alarms, but his warnings had gone unheeded. After the fatal fire, it appears that minimal upgrades were made to Seacliff, which continued to house and treat patients. Meanwhile, rumours of mistreatment of patients started to become more substantial. The orthogenetic frame was first admitted to Seacliff in November 1945 and was wrongly diagnosed incipient schizophrenia. Yeah, like I said before, this has got like old school words in it, it's not all modern medical jargon, so yeah, you just have to follow along best you can. She spent much of the next 8 years at Seacliff and Avondale Hospital in Auckland, sometimes as a voluntary patient and sometimes against her will. During her time at Seacliff, Frame received electric shock therapy and witnessed other patients being beaten and trying to escape. In 1951, Frame published her debut, The Lagoon and Other Stories, a short story collection which won her the Herbert Church Memorial Award in December 1952. Frame claimed that the success of her writing and newfound fame put a stop to her scheduled lobotomy, an operation her mother had already signed off on. Many others at Seacliff were not so lucky. A frontal lobotomy, which involved drilling a hole in the brain through the eye socket, was at the time believed to be the cure of a range of disorders from anxiety to schizophrenia. It's one of the most horrific medical procedures ever devised, with a very high risk of leaving the patient brain dead or in a vegetative state. The procedure is now discredited and outlawed. If Frame had received a lobotomy, she would have remained in hospital for the rest of her life. Wow. In the years following the fire, Seacliff began moving patients in operation to Cherry Farm Hospital, 7 kilometres to the north. This process took several years and was sped up after Frame and others shared their experience at Seacliff in 1973. In 1973, Seacliff officially closed and the buildings and grounds abandoned. After the hospital closed, explorers in the area regularly reported seeing ghosts on the ground. Andrew Smith, who runs Hair Razor Ghost Tours in Dunedin, had said Seacliff remains... Alright, there's a bit more of that article there, but I'm just going to leave out the last little bit. I'm sort of not super interested in ghost story stuff. So yeah, that was pretty messed up. So once again, that article was on the spin-off, which is available on www.thespinoff.co.nz. And it was the story of Seacliff, the most haunted place in New Zealand. Yeah, that was pretty messed up. Got another one here. A lot of this might just repeat the same information of the first article, but hey, if you're still watching and you want to know more, keep watching, because I'm going to read Inside Seacliff's Enchanted Forest, The Asylum, the Tragedy, and the Shadow They Cast, by Hamish McNally, on the 8th of January 2022. And that one's available on www.stuff.co.nz. 2 paradise ducks, a rabbit, and a herd of cows. That's the estimated population of Seacliff, about a 20-minute scenic drive north of Dunedin, on this particular Friday. There is no one around, despite official figures putting the human population of the township at 100. This is not a story about those who live on the settlement's few streets, Kilgore and Palmer Street, but one about the shadow that continues to be associated with it. Seacliff, nestled in between a railway track and the Pacific Ocean, so it's right by a cliff over the sea, that's why it's called Seacliff. I always thought it was Sea Cliffs, plural, but it's just Seacliff. Anyway, is infamous for housing what was once the largest building commissioned in New Zealand, a 500-bed psychiatric hospital. Okay, so we know that's not quite correct. It was 500 beds, but they had TB wards in other places too. It wasn't just for the mentally ill, but yeah, anyway. Little remains of the Cliffs Lunatic Asylum, which was built in the Scottish baronial style. Other than the outlines of some stone foundations, land substance was first noted just 3 years after the building opened. Land subsidence was noticed just after the 3 years after the building opened in 1884, but more buildings were added anyway. The main building was eventually torn down in 1959, so it was open. Yeah, it was closed down in 1973, but the main building was torn down in 1959. I think I said 1952 before, but I was wrong. It's 1959, and the entire facility closed in 1973. That's what this article says. This asylum remains one of New Zealand's most infamous architectural blunders, and all but destroyed the reputation of one of the country's finest architects, Robert Lawson, who designed Lanark Castle, Otago Boys High School, and Christchurch. So he's a Dunedin architect, obviously. That's all Dunedin Otago district stuff. But the name Seacliff is permanently etched into the minds of many due to a fire inside a wooden dormitory building the night of the 8th of December 1942. It's one of the country's worst fires. 37 women perished inside the locked Ward 5. Only 2 patients were able to escape because the window shutters in their cells were unlocked. The fire was caused by electrical wires shorting, attributed to the ground under the building subsiding. I've read other articles that say they don't know why the fire started, but this one reckons electrical wiring due to the building slipping because of the architectural faults, I think is what it means. Anyway, the last building on the site, now known as Truby King Recreational Reserve, was demolished in the early 1990s, and in 2012 it was listed by Heritage New Zealand as a Category 1 heritage area. The outstanding power of this place in its absence, but its ability to invoke the history of the Seacliff Asylum and all the forgotten inmates, the assessment criteria said. While there is a small memorial on the site, there is nothing listing the names of those who died, but all that is expected to change. The Dunedin City Council is updating the management plan for the 16-hectare reserve. A walk through the reserve named after Seacliff Medical Superintendent Sir Frederick Truby King. So that's Dr. Truby King, that deviant I was talking about before, who went on to found Plunkett, reveals that it is long overdue. Work needs to be done. Everything from the chain-blocking vehicle access to the car park to the boggy ground, the rabbit holes, and the general lack of upkeep of the wooded area once known as the Enchanted Forest. You could call it the Cursed Forest, depending on which way you look at it. But anyway, it's a lack of information about a shameful period of the country's past that is the most damning. The fire was hidden under the carpet. Dunedin councillor Cameron Houlihan, who lost her grandmother Catherine Wilson in the disaster, told a council meeting. I'm actually going to stop reading this now because this is just the same stuff that we were reading before, really. It's just, yeah. I mean, it does have something interesting in this one. It says that Janet Frame was given, or was a victim of, electroconvulsive treatment more than 200 times between 1947 and 1955. Yeah, so, yeah, it's all bad. I mean, sea cliffs, wow. Yeah, there's nothing, I'm just having a quick read. There's nothing more interesting, really, that I haven't said from the first article in here. No, it's all fairly much the same information. Yeah. Horrific. A former resident told Stuff the reserve had attracted an unusual assortment of people and groups over the years, from ghost hunters to underground dance parties. I wouldn't want to go to a dance party there. But the large park is all but silent on this particular Friday, apart from the bird song. It remains an eerily beautiful place, a place full of the memories of those who had walked before. This vibrant region also has many stories to tell. Tourism... Oh, sorry, this isn't part of the article. This is an ad at the bottom I'm reading. Anyway, that was the article from Hamish McNally, the senior reporter on stuff.co.nz, inside Sea Cliffs Enchanted Forest, the asylum, the tragedy, and the shadow they cast. Yeah, stuff.co.nz. Yeah, Sea Cliffs. Pretty messed up. I mean, there may be a whole bunch of messed up stuff that was going on there that wasn't part of the articles I'm just reading. I mean, obviously it was all a long time ago, and records from back then are sketchy to say the least. Sounds like a bunch of nasty medical procedures. At least it doesn't sound like there was sexual violence going on at Sea Cliffs from the information I've read. I'm not saying there wasn't. I wouldn't put anything past, mind you, that FGM, that's about as sexual violence as you can get, isn't it? What I meant by that was there's no reports that I've read of people getting sexually assaulted by other patients and doctors, staff, etc. But, yeah, I have read other stories about other places where that was taking place, so... Who knows? Like I said, it's all too long ago. Maybe a lot of records got destroyed in that fire. Who knows? It's hard to know. But yeah, that would have been a pretty desperate situation with no staff there to help evacuate, no correct fire alarm to, alert the fire brigade and whatnot. I mean, the whole thing was a mess. What else can you say? Disturbing as. I feel genuinely disturbed looking into that. But anyway, have a good one, everybody. All the best.